Today we're going to concentrate on the line and wash method, and it's one that I really enjoy using. It's a very old method, and what I like about it is it's a good balance between line and colour. So the line describes the shape and the form of the objects, and the colour, or the paint should I say, describes the colour and the mood of the painting. Before we start painting, what I want to do is to talk about how we actually hold our pens. If we're writing a document, what we tend to do is to put our hand on the paper, or rest our hand on the paper, and we tend to write with ease. Watercolour painting. What I want you to think about is holding your pen in a different way. So instead of putting your hand on the paper, that comfort zone, what I want you to do is to lift your hand and think about lifting your hand off the paper. So your little finger is kind of just on the paper and your pen is about that point, and then what happens is you're making kind of more expressive marks. I'm not really particularly drawing anything at the moment, I'm just making wibbly wobbly shapes that are kind of free and expressive, and that's what you're looking for. So think about how you hold your pen, and while we're doing the line and wash, try and think a little bit differently. Try and hold your pen off the paper or your hand away from the paper to create more expressive marks. And I think that will really loosen up your drawing. Here's the photograph that I want to use today, and it was a photograph that I took in the Isle of Man last year. I love to paint buildings. I didn't have a lot of time on the day, so I took this quick photograph, and what I did was I got a sheet of drawing paper out. I had about 15 minutes. I got my pen out, a piece of charcoal, and produced a line and wash. It's, well, a line and charcoal we can call it. And you can see how expressive the marks are. That's because I didn't have a lot of time to fiddle on the detail, but I like that because what that's doing is it's making the mark making more interesting and more expressive. And what I've done is I've laid the marks down with the pen, which is what we're going to do with the watercolour today, and then I've rubbed the charcoal into the darkest areas. And for me, the reference drawing is actually more exciting now than the photograph, because what I've done is I've eliminated all that fussiness and detail, and I'm looking for a simplistic scene, a simplistic way of painting this scene. So I shall use this and this as my reference. So let's get started with the drawing. I thought it best to mention that I'm using a waterproof black pen. Always best to check first that your pen is waterproof. You really don't want any disasters when it comes to putting the water down. And I'm using a 0.7, which is quite a thick nib on that pen. I've got my reference photograph, and you can see that I've very roughly drawn out my picture. When I'm on site, I don't tend to do any drawing at all. I like to go straight in with the pen. But today I thought we'll have a little bit more structure and we'll have just a very brief outline. What I don't want you to do is to spend ages and ages drawing out your reference photograph, because then what you'll do is you will very carefully copy those lines and your drawing will become a little bit stilted and stiff, and we're looking for a nice free line. So the less pencil lines, the better. Let's start with some pen. I tend to start from the left-hand side and I'll work my way across. Think about how you're holding your pen, resting the little finger onto the paper and making your marks all kind of wibbly wobbly. I hate to see lines that look as though you've put them down with a ruler, so we're keeping them nice and loose. I also like to connect lines, so this is my building here, and then I'll come back and I'm going to create some foliage shapes that connect to that line, so everything's connected. Okay, we'll come back over here and we'll put in the roof shape. And you can see that my lines are very wobbly, but that's character, a bit of character in your drawing. I want to put these little marks here that's going to suggest this kind of corrugated roof. So you can see I'm resting my hand a little bit more on the paper there because I need a little bit more accuracy. And I can go over these lines and make them a little bit stronger. We'll definitely do that later on with the rest of the drawing. Make some stronger marks. Again, coming down and connecting shapes. So this now becomes this lovely old dry stone wall. You might think these don't look like stones, but they will when we put some more value on them. Connecting your lines, trying not to take your pen off the paper really, which is quite difficult, but once you get the hang of that, it's something that will come naturally to you. Okay, so we've got a bit of wall in. Now we've got a window. We'll come across, put this little window shape in. Remember, it's an old building, so these wobbly lines are actually quite nice. Connecting lines, so we'll put some grass shapes on the end of the building here. Let's come back up, put another window in. I often make the wrong lines with my drawing. I'm not perfect. What I tend to do is to go over it with the right line. And usually, you know, you're never really going to tell at the end of the day. In fact, it makes for a more interesting drawing. Okay, so the building's starting to appear now. Let's come to the top here, and we're just putting in the basics for now. So the line is describing the shape. A little chimney. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the line in, and then when we've put the line in, we're going to use the pen to create some value as well. So we can cross-hatch and stipple into these areas. Another roof. My goodness, these are wobbly lines. But doesn't it give it character? Okay, we'll connect the roof shape. I can see that I've got this lovely kind of foliage. Comes across here, connects to a wall shape. And the foliage comes across and down onto the wall. Scribbling, nice expressive marks. Having a little rest, just having a look what I'm up to. Back in again. Another chimney. It's a beautiful part of the world. Lots of interesting cottages and buildings to paint. This little building here actually isn't in the reference photograph, but it was in my drawing, so I'm going to include that. Just tapering off the end here, so I'm having to make this bit up really, but I'm just suggesting more foliage. There's a wall shape. We need to think about a line that comes across and anchors all this onto the ground. Okay. We've got most of our linear marks in now. What I want to think about is value as well. We're going to create some value with the colour, but I also want to create some value with the pen. So I'm thinking about where the light's coming from. So the light is coming from the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a bit of cross-hatching. So cross-hatching is, again, a very old method where I'm kind of putting these lovely linear strokes into my drawing. And then I'll come back the other way. And all these beautiful marks that you're making, we're going to see these under the paint. This chimney here is darker. We've got shadows under the foliage, so we can sweep those in. Again, connecting them to the line, making some lines thicker and stronger. You could even cross-hatch into that, couldn't you? This area is darker as well, and we really want to show off that roof, so I'll make sure that I make that quite dark. I'd also like to put some suggestions of the roof shape into here. So, well, just a few marks. We'll make some very thick marks. We'll leave a shape, a few gaps, and make some thinner marks. Trying not to kind of put every single one in, really. I'd like to darken underneath here. I'm having to rest my hand on the paper to do this, because I need to block in that darker value. We'll have a little bit more foliage coming up here. Now you can see from the reference photograph that this is a hill. But what I'm doing is I'm making my composition a little bit more interesting and putting in some kind of foliagey shapes that kind of sweep around the picture. It's your picture at the end of the day, so you're allowed to do what you like. A little bit of value into the stones. Maybe some grass shapes. Dark into the windows. And the doorway. I'm looking for a good balance overall. I'll put some nice dark marks in between these little fence posts. Some more value on the chimney pots. We're nearly ready to paint. A few road markings would be nice as well, wouldn't they? So we'll just put some nice squiggly marks in here. I like to get all the pen down first before I put the washes on, so just a few more squiggles, a few more darks. And you can see that really I'm not being too careful here. But what I want is a nice spontaneous loose feel to my drawing. So if I'm too careful, I'm almost creating a photographic reference, and that's something that I really don't want. I think that's probably enough for now. And I think we're ready to put some paint onto our drawing. Okay, we're ready to do some painting now. What I'm looking for is not to create a watercolour painting, because this isn't a watercolour painting, it's a line and wash. I'm looking to create a good balance between line and colour. So the colour mustn't kind of be too strong, because I want to allow the line to show through. I also want you to do something that I wouldn't normally ask you to do. I want you to allow colours to bleed on the paper, which is something we tend to fight. You'll know what I'm talking about as the demonstration goes on. So let's get started. I'll just mention that I'm using a number 12 brush and a number 8 round. And the colours that I'm using is a raw sienna, ultramarine blue, cadmium yellow, and a cadmium red. So a very simple palette. Ooh, let's put our sky in. We'll wet the paper first. My ink should be dry by now. Nice clean water. I'm taking that through into the bushes. I'll try and paint around my chimney pots, but hey, it's not the end of the world if that bleeds a little bit. In fact, we're going to encourage that anyway. I'm going to have to pick my paper up and tilt my board at some point when I put my sky in, to get a nice even flow. Okay, so paper nice and wet. Remember where your light's coming from. It's coming from the right hand side, so we'll take a little bit of the raw sienna, very light mixture. We could even put a bit of cadmium red into that. It's your picture. You can do exactly what you like. A little bit of raw sienna, a little bit of cadmium red. They hadn't planned for the cadmium red, but I think it's going to look nice. I want a very simple sky. Let's take some ultramarine blue. Just a little bit of that. You can see it's clogged into my brush there, so I'll make sure that I clean it on my old towel before I put that onto the paper. I'm going to swoosh in some of that blue. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some ultramarine blue and a little bit of the cadmium red and even a little bit of the raw sienna. I'm looking to make a purpley kind of shadow colour. And what I want to do is to kind of run that in here as well. Now I'm going to pick my board up and I'm going to tilt it. So you can see that I'm tilting my board and allowing the paint to run in that nice direction. What I like to do is to lift off any excess paint here, and then it doesn't run back into my sky. But you can see that's quite effective. Let's put it back down into position. There we go. I may have a problem here because it's actually run onto the tape, so just pull that down a little bit. Okay, so we've got our lovely sky in. Now let's think about the other colours within the picture while this is still wet. So let's concentrate on our greens. Just soften that a bit. Let's look at the distant greens, the far away greens. So the cadmium yellow, a little bit of that, and some ultramarine blue. So I'm looking to make quite a bluey green. And I'm going to drop this into this area here, a little bit more yellow. And this is probably still wet. So what's going to happen is it's going to bleed up into the sky area. And that's what we're looking for. A little bit more yellow into that mixture now. And let's put these greens in here. Again, holding my brush halfway down the barrel. Fresher marks. I am not trying to keep within the lines. Definitely not trying to keep within the lines. I want the paint to break the line. See how that's exploded there? I like that. Okay, and then we've got some greens on this side, and you can see that my painting is very wet. But let's go for it. Cadmium yellow with just a touch of the ultramarine blue, and I'm just dropping that in where my ink marks are. We'll put a few little blobs up here. You can always go back in with the pen later. Okay. I want to put the roof in now. I want it to be a nice red orange roof, and I also want it to explode into the sky a little bit. So I'm taking my cadmium yellow and a little bit of cadmium red to make that lovely orange colour. And we'll put that in all in one go. It's a great way of painting because the line really is doing most of the work for you. I've deliberately let in that run. Let's put a little bit into this roof here and a little bit into this one. And you can see that it's running, but that's something that normally we'd fight and we'd dab it with a tissue and get all upset about that. Let's let that happen naturally and see how it looks when it's finished. Let's put some shadows in as well. So ultramarine blue, in fact, it's the same colour that I use for my shadow in my sky. Ultramarine blue, a little bit of the cadmium red. And what I want to do here is to drop in shadow colour. So this area here is in shadow. And the green is going to run and the orange is going to run. Very exciting. Okay, let's take some of that across. This area here is in shadow, so we'll put that in with the same mixture. This area is in shadow as well. So I'm looking for the areas where I cross-hatch with my pen because I know that they are the darkest values. I'm going to drop a little bit to this area here. Let's put some value onto the walls. We're working very much wet into wet. We're not stopping. Bit of raw sienna. Let's put some marks of raw sienna into that. We could also drop some of the greens into that. We can put bits of water in and soften that down, allow some of that shadow colour to seep into that area. More wall here. Again, everything's still very wet. And while we're playing this dangerous game of wet into wet, let's wet the foreground area with lots of water and almost kind of allowing these colours to run into my foreground. Let's take some ultramarine blue, put a bit of that in. It's your picture, you can put any colour you like in. You can even put some of that kind of orangey colour in. Allow some of the colours to run together. Don't rub them too much because you don't want to kind of create mud. We're looking for nice fresh washes. And you can see that it's very much wet into wet. I really enjoy that. It's a very exciting way of painting. What I need to do now is to let that dry and then work into it when it's completely dry. My painting's nearly dry enough to work on. So you can see that it contains lots of happy accidents. I know that my roof has kind of bled into my sky here and the greens have bled up here, but we're looking for a nice spontaneous loose painting to go with the drawing, so I'm not going to let that worry me at all. What I'm going to do now is to tidy up a little bit. So I'd like to put some orange chimney pots in. So that's the cadmium yellow with the cadmium red. I missed this one off, didn't I? So we'll put this one in. And we've got a few. Just one stroke. If you can say it with one stroke, that's better than saying it with 4 or 5. Just quick little marks that suggest a subject. Let's put a bit of value and detail into this area here. Mainly this is all shadow work. So I'm going to mix the ultramarine blue with a little bit of cadmium red. What that's doing is it's giving me a nice stronger shadow. And I've gone down to my number 8 brush, my smaller brush, for a little bit more control. I'm going to deepen the shadows underneath this area here, underneath the roof. It's got this lovely corrugated old roof. I'm pushing the pigment into the indentations that I put in with my pen. And I'll soften that with a little bit of clean water. We'll bring that shadow down over the white building. I'm not really going to paint the white building. I want to leave it as a white. But what I will do is I'll put a few little suggestions of bits of shadow in there. But it'd be nice to have one area that's completely white. Let's make a thicker mixture. Ultramarine blue and some cadmium red. And I'll put the windows in. Now, again, I'm playing a dangerous game because this area is wet. But we'll put it in anyway. Let's live dangerously. It's quite a strong mixture. I'm going to drop in a little bit more blue. And that makes such a difference, having that dark. I'm also going to put in this darker value into my doorway. And I'll soften it, so I'll put my brush in the water, take the excess off, and just kind of pull that down, because let's go back to what I said at the beginning. I do want to see the lines. So we'll make sure that we can see those. There's no point putting them in and not showing them off. Again, it's all about stronger value now. So this lovely dark mixture that we've got of the ultramarine blue and the cadmium red is going to come in quite useful. I'm going to darken this area here, and that's going to make that lovely rooftop jump forward. I'm also going to put some shadow marks just around my pen marks here onto the roof. Again, I feel that this could be slightly darker, and I don't paint the whole thing. What I'll do is I'll put in a value and then I'll soften it because I want to see the lines. Let's strengthen the shadows underneath this lovely foliage that's growing against this wall. I can just soften that back, like so. I'm looking for a good balance, so I feel that I need to go darker onto the gable end of this building. And what that's going to do is it's going to show off the stone shape. So we'll put in some darker marks. Again, my little fingers resting on the paper. I'm not working flat. It's giving me more spontaneous marks. And we'll push that up, and then I'll go back into the water and I'll just soften that. This paint seems quite dark, but remember, it's going to dry lighter. How about some shadows within our dry stone wall? So I'm just going to pop them in where I put my little dark cross-hatching marks, like so. We can even use the same mixture, the ultramarine blue with the cadmium red, and we can put that into our foliage area as well. And we can drop that in. Again, not too strong. We want to allow the line to show through, and just a little bit at a time. And we just drop some water in. Just giving me a bit more depth into that area. I'd like some greens along the bottom here. So back to our cadmium yellow and ultramarine blue. And you can see that I put little marks in there to suggest grasses. I'll put a few up here as well. And you can see I'm not being very careful with this. Just very loose marks. Here's another shadow area I think I'm going to darken. So all the time I'm assessing my picture for a good balance between darks and lights. Just a little bit of work into the foreground now. I'm quite happy with how this is looking. I'll take my big brush and put a bit of value into the foreground. I love this linear mark here because that's suggesting the road, isn't it? So again, I could use my cadmium red and ultramarine blue. I could even drop some of the raw sienna into that. It doesn't really matter what colour you use, as long as it's a stronger value. That's kind of nice looking brown. That's the raw sienna, cadmium red, a little bit of ultramarine blue. And again, just these lovely kind of spontaneous marks. I'll make that a little bit thicker. I think I'll put a bit of shadow work here as well. I can soften that with lots of clean water because I want to see the line. We could splatter water onto that as well. Line and wash allows you to be so much freer than general watercolour painting. Again, I think we need to let this dry and make a decision whether we need to add any more detail or interest to the picture. I've had a few minutes to assess my painting. Just a couple of little things I want to do. I don't want to overwork it because I'm enjoying the spontaneity of it all and the looseness. I'd like to put a little bit of value with my ultramarine blue and a bit of cadmium red onto my left-hand chimney pot. I'll put a little bit of value there. I wouldn't really necessarily put them in the others, but I think that it needed it on this one. I've also just darkened this little bit here, just to counterchange the light roof against the dark value. And I think my little painting from the Isle of Man, my little line and wash, is finished. And I really hope that you have a go. Find a subject of your own or use my reference photograph. Find something that's achievable, not too difficult. Keep it nice and simple. Remember the technique for holding your pen. Nice, loose, spontaneous marks, not too much pencil to start with. Go wild with the washes, allow them to bleed, and hopefully you'll have a lovely loose painting or line and wash at the end of it.